If I draw a circle on a piece of paper, it's really just a layer of graphite.
Right, it's just flat, completely static.
Exactly. And your brain just processes it as, a meaningless geometric shape. But if I draw that exact same circle, like flattening out on the bottom and stretching out at the top, something wild happens.
Your brain basically hacks itself.
It really does. It tells you that you aren't looking at graphite anymore. You are looking at, well, a heavy water balloon violently hitting the floor.
Yeah, it's the ultimate visual and psychological optical illusion.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at the specific levers artists pull to trick you. Yes, you listening in to feeling empathy and weight from a literal puddle of ink.
Because, we spend our entire lives instinctively understanding gravity and physics, right?
Mhm.
And when an artist knows exactly how to manipulate those subconscious expectations, they can make us believe a stack of drawings is alive.
Which brings us to our source material today. We're diving into this incredible Adobe guide on the 12 principles of animation.
A classic.
Truly. And our mission today is to clearly define these 12 principles for you as a beginner. We want to take on a sort of teacher and student approach to figure out why these tricks still work on our brains.
And these fundamentals, they were engineered by Walt Disney's core group of animators, the 9 Old Men, way back in the 1930s.
Yeah, and later published in 1981 by Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas in their book, The Illusion of Life.
Those guys basically locked themselves in a studio for decades, just obsessively studying human movement. And the craziest part is how universal it is today.
Right, the source mentions 5 main types of animation, right?
Yeah, so there's 3D or CGI, which is everywhere in cinemas, traditional cell animation where they literally painted on clear sheets, stop motion using clay or puppets.
Oh, and motion graphics for like text and screens.
Exactly. And finally, vector animation, which uses math equations instead of pixels so things never blur.
But the medium doesn't really matter. Whether it's an 1800s flipbook or a modern 3D engine, the rules are the same. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before a character can do anything, they have to exist in a physical world.
They need gravity.
Yes. So the first hurdle is tricking your eye into believing a flat drawing has mass.
And that brings us to the first principle, squash and stretch. It's all about giving a sense of weight and flexibility.
Like the classic bouncing ball.
Exactly. When the ball falls, it stretches out. But the split second it hits the ground, its squash is completely flat and widens out.
So it's literally just like that water balloon analogy I used.
Yeah, the force of the impact pushes the mass out to the sides. But there is a very strict rule here. Volume has to be maintained.
Wait, meaning the size can't change.
Right. If you stretch the ball vertically to make it tall, it has to contract horizontally,
Because if you just make it taller without making it thinner, it looks like it's spontaneously growing.
which instantly shatters the illusion. Your brain rejects the violation of mass.
That makes total sense. So once we have mass, how do we get them to actually move?
Well, you have to prepare the audience first. That's the second principle. Anticipation.
Like winding up.
Exactly. A golfer doesn't just swing from a resting position. They have to pull their arms back. Or a footballer getting ready for a penalty kick, they swing their foot way back first.
It's like a giant neon sign pointing to where the action is about to happen.
Precisely. If you're watching a massive movie screen, your eyes can't look everywhere. Anticipation tells your brain, hey, look right here.
But what about when the action stops?
That's where the third and fourth concepts come in, usually grouped together. Follow through and overlapping action.
Okay, what's the difference?
So when a body stops moving, it doesn't just freeze solid. Parts of it keep moving forward before pulling back to the center of mass. That's follow through.
Like inertia.
Right. And overlapping action is the idea that different parts of the body, or like clothing, move at different rates.
Oh, so if I spin around, my body stops, but my jacket keeps swishing for a second.
You got it. Hair, coattails, all of that.
I have to ask, though, doesn't adding all these overlapping movements make the animation look, I don't know, really messy, like chaotic?
What's fascinating here is that without that specific messiness, the character looks like a rigid robot.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Your brain subconsciously expects the laws of physics to apply. It expects the messiness of reality.
Okay, so we've got weight, wind-ups, and momentum, but how do we get them from point A to point B smoothly?
That's the principle of ease in and ease out, sometimes called slow in and slow out.
Because things don't just instantly hit top speed in real life.
Right. A car requires acceleration and deceleration. And animators achieve this by manipulating time and frame counts.
So drawing more frames at the beginning.
Exactly. Lots of frames with tiny movements at the start means it looks slow. Then in the middle, at top speed, they use fewer frames with wider gaps.
Oh, wow. So more frames actually equals slower movement to the human eye.
It exploits our persistence of vision. And speaking of moving through space, we also have arcs.
Because joints act like hinges, right? We don't move in perfectly straight lines.
We really don't. If you throw a ball or just point your arm, there's a subtle curve. Traditional animators would literally sketch these arcs on paper to keep the movement fluid.
But wait, what if an animator deliberately breaks that rule? Like, what if they just go in a straight, unnatural line?
Well, usually it looks terrible.
I'd imagine.
But if you break it intentionally, at extreme speed, you get the animation smear.
Oh, I've heard of this, like from Looney Tunes?
Yes. The source tells this great story about Chuck Jones in 1942. He wanted a character to move amusingly fast, so instead of drawing individual frames, he just blurred the character into a single stretched-out blob.
Just a giant smear of paint. And he did it to save time, right?
It did. It was a budget shortcut. But it conveyed chaotic speed so perfectly that it became a staple. You still see it in The Simpsons today.
That's brilliant. So what about timing? The source mentions that too.
Timing is the ultimate anchor. You can draw a beautiful boulder, but if the timing is wrong, it looks like a balloon.
It makes me think of bicycle gears.
Oh, how so?
Well, in first gear, you're pedaling super fast using a ton of frames. Just to move an inch, it feels heavy. But in high gear, one push sends you flying. Fewer frames, lighter weight.
That is a perfect analogy. A feather reacts instantly with few frames. A boulder takes tons of frames to get rolling.
Okay, so our characters are moving perfectly, but they aren't just in a white void. How does the animator manage the whole scene?
That's the principle of staging. The animator is basically the film director.
Right, directing the audience's eye. And the source explicitly talks about removing clutter.
Exactly. You have to get rid of anything that distracts from the core narrative of that specific shot, which is hard when you can draw literally anything.
Restraint is key. So how do they actually draw these scenes?
They use two workflows: straight ahead action versus pose to pose.
Straight ahead is just drawing frame 1, then 2, then 3, right?
Yeah, going chronologically. It's amazing for fluid action scenes, like a fire or a chaotic fight.
But the downside is you might lose your proportions, right? Like the head gets too big by the end of the scene.
Structural drift, exactly. That's why they also use pose to pose.
Where they draw the extreme moments first.
Right, the start, the middle climax, and the end.
Yeah.
Then they fill in the gaps. It's much better for deep emotional scenes where acting is crucial.
Because you can't have your character drifting off model during a tragic monologue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, to make those scenes feel human, they use secondary action.
Like a character swinging their arms while walking.
Or nervously chewing their lip while listening. It adds psychological depth.
But hold on, I see a conflict here.
Oh,
If staging is all about removing clutter and focusing the eye, doesn't adding a secondary action completely sabotage that? Like, if a guy's giving a serious monologue but he's tapping his foot, doesn't that distract you?
this raises an important question about hierarchy in art. A secondary action must only emphasize the main action.
Never distract.
Never. If the foot tapping makes you stop listening, the animator failed. It's supposed to add color. The nervous tapping should amplify the anxiety of his words, not fight them.
It's an amplifier, not a competitor. Got it. So we have technical perfection now. But if it's too real, it's boring. How do they make us care?
With exaggeration. The Disney philosophy is to take reality and push it just beyond its physical limits.
Oh, like the jaw drop. The source mentions that in real life, your mouth opens an inch. In a cartoon, the jaw literally unrolls to the floor.
Right. It's biologically impossible, but it perfectly represents how sudden surprise actually feels.
To make that work without looking like a scribble, you need the next principle, solid drawing.
Understanding 3D space, gravity, and anatomy, even on a flat piece of paper.
And the source specifically warns against twins, right?
Yeah, twinning is when the left and right sides of a character are perfectly symmetrical.
Like both hands on their hips at the exact same angle.
It looks lifeless. Perfect symmetry doesn't exist in nature, so avoiding it makes the character feel biological.
Which leads to the final principle, appeal. Charisma.
Whether it's a cute caterpillar or an evil dragon, they have to be magnetically interesting.
And it's all about geometry. Round faces for cute characters, angular features for strong ones.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The source uses the movie Encanto, the character Bruno.
Oh, great example.
At first, he's drawn, hunched over, hidden in shadows, super jagged geometry. You don't trust him.
He lacks trustworthy visual markers.
But then, when the plot needs you to sympathize with him, they physically change his appeal. They show his wide, round eyes and soften his posture.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Appeal and solid drawing are manipulating your psychology. The physical geometry dictates how you feel about their morality.
It's pure genius. We went from basic gravity with squash and stretch all the way to emotional manipulation with appeal.
It's a complete framework for creating life from nothing.
So the next time you, our listener, watch an animated movie or see a graphic on a website, you're going to see the invisible strings.
You'll see the artist's sleight of hand everywhere.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a century of tricks to make us empathize with 2D drawings. Where does this leave us?
I want you to ponder this final thought. These rules trick our brains perfectly. But think about the near future. Think about hyperrealistic AI avatars and VR environments.
Oh, wow.
How might these exact 90-year-old principles be weaponized? If an AI avatar uses perfect timing and appeal geometry to look trustworthy, will these rules be used to subconsciously manipulate our trust in digital spaces? It's not just about cartoon mice anymore. It's about engineering synthetic humanity.
That is a terrifyingly fascinating thought. Who is really pulling the strings behind the illusion? Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep looking closely.